Hi there. It is November 6th, 2024. My name is Kalden Dhatsenpa. I'm the host of Metropolis. And today, I'm joined by Katia Lo-Innes. How are you doing, Katia?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on the show, Kalden.
Of course. For those who don't know, Katia is a writer and associate producer at The Breach. Her work has appeared in Hobart Pulp, Maisonneuve, This, and other publications.
Yeah, that's me.
How long have you been writing?
Since my first year of undergrad, in terms of getting stuff published, I wrote for the McGill Tribune, outing myself as a McGill graduate. Yeah, I know that was 7 years ago. So I've just been at it.
Nice, terrific.
It's been nice. I started doing it because I wanted free concert tickets.
Oh, what concert? I guess
it was just arts. Yeah, I think I went to the Rostam show for free.
Oh, nice.
In 2017.
Nice.
And I just I went to Osheaga for free. Great way to get free tickets.
That's actually huge.
It was huge. It was huge. 3 days for free.
Wow.
Those tickets are really expensive.
Writing from the Tribune?
Yeah. I did an interview in the press tent, and I did not meet King Princess, but we passed each other and kind of nodded when she was still big.
That's good enough.
I wrote 2 articles, and they asked us to write more, and I did not.
You're like, that's enough.
I was like, that's enough. I want to go see Young Thug and party.
Well, today we are not talking about Young Thug. Today, there's actually been so much news. It's been a news-heavy month. Even.
It has. I feel like last week we were talking, we're like, oh, there's not going to be anything to talk about. And then lo and behold, yesterday was quite literally the U.S. election.
Yes, the U.S. election where Donald Trump has been re-elected as the 47th president. He was up against, of course, Kamala Harris, who spent maybe 2 months here in Montreal.
I think she went to 1 year of CEGEP.
1 year of CEGEP, yeah.
One of I think the first presidential candidate to ever go to CEGEP. Incredible. Or American presidential candidate.
Well, and she lost. So what does that say about the CEGEP system?
Huge overhaul. Maybe they're right with all the Francisization.
How many presidents have we produced out of CEGEP? Yeah, it's kind of funny when people talk about Kamala as Montreal and I think a pride. I know in Cult Montreal, they're always posting that article about how Quebec is the most pro Kamala province.
I don't think that's a win though, because her policies are quite right.
Yeah. She is a prosecutor. She has she's jailed parents for truancy. If the parents' kids don't go to school, she jails the parents.
I actually didn't know that. That is not good.
Oh my god.
That is terrible.
This is stuff I remember digging up back in 2020 when she was trying to get the nomination along with Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and all those people.
Yeah. That's when she still had Medicare and the Green New Deal in the bill.
Yeah.
And then she I think got rid of all of those the second she took office, and then I guess ran this past fall.
Yeah. I guess an open question, right? Because to bring this back to kind of Montreal, Quebec, Canada, what are you expecting is going to be the fallout from this American election for Montrealers, let's say?
Well, I guess one thing that we can kind of take from this recent election, as well as the elections in BC and even those in the UK and France, is that a lot of progressive or ostensibly progressive left parties are moving center to center right. Mm-hmm. The fact that Italy, Meloni has a harsher policy on military exports to Israel than Kamala Harris's campaign does, I think kind of shows a lot where the limits of acceptable political discourse are right now.
Yeah, Maloney's party famously incredibly to the right.
Fascist. They're proudly fascists. And so the fact that a fascist party is more progressive on this issue than either of the leading parties in the States is troubling. And to bring it back to the original point, I think there's been a move, especially with the NDP provincially and federally, to cater to this missing middle. Mm-hmm. And especially I think where Canada is kind of similar to where America was a couple of years ago, exiting the Obama era. We're kind of exiting a Trudeau era where I think a lot of the Liberals are just kind of offering we're not as evil as these guys, but not really staking their campaign on any material consequences or material promises, whereas Polyev and the Conservatives are. And so I think the consequences are that I think it's probably emboldened the far right in Canada, and could also give us a preview of what's to come next year at our own general election if the left doesn't shape up and start offering people real solutions to the problems they see, instead of just kind of saying they're better than the other guys, but not really saying why.
You should vote for me because I'm not them, right?
That's basically it.
Which is like, I think that's been kind of like the strategy from so many kind of like different centrists or leftists, and it's clearly been that. It's like, that's not enough, right? You can't just like run off that. You need to actually like have some kind of like platform, some kind of plan, you know. And they're clearly there's a real lack of that. I think Kamala was barely like talking about anything about like public policy. Most of the time it was just kind of like catering towards like far right voters, right? Where like you'll have that, right? We talked about this, where it's like you have these parties that are either like liberal, left, center, and they try to cater towards the right wingers who are handing the elections to Donald Trump. And you have Kamala doing stuff like getting endorsements from like Liz Cheney. Kamala went on more I think was it like little like junkets with like Liz Cheney than she did with like any union president, any kind of like actual like even like other kind of like Democratic like figures in like key like districts. And she decided to go with Liz Cheney more because there's this idea that like it's better to chase the people who are either undecided or the swing people, right? And she lost like all the major like swing states.
I'm pretty sure they sent either Cheney or the Clintons to Michigan. I think it was Cheney. They sent the Cheneys to Michigan, which is like the most Muslim state in America, and I think there's like a lot of people who immigrated there after like America's infamous war on terror. So big mistake. And oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
No, I mean, it's interesting you bring up Michigan, but Michigan was like, I think to me is like a clear like bellwether for like just their Kamala's approach to politics, people's appetites. Like it was something like in like Dearborn, Michigan, like a suburb of like Detroit, one of the highest like Muslim populations there. In like 2020, it's something like Joe Biden got like 88% of the vote. This time Kamala is like barely breaking, like getting like less than half of that, right? Yeah. And people are saying, oh, is it like maybe it's like people voting for Trump instead? The Trump vote is like actually the same there. It's just people stayed home. People like just did not want to vote for Kamala, right?
Yeah.
And this happened. I mean, there was signs of this happening earlier on during the Democratic primaries, where you had this uncommitted movement, this like massive like people, like really important organizers, kind of mid to low level organizers for the Democratic Party. They were organizing against Joe Biden. They're getting people to vote for an uncommitted option, and this was in response to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, their administration's stance in Palestine, right? And this is obviously Palestine is a huge matter for Muslim Americans in Michigan, and I think you saw what happened this election because of the Biden stance on it. It's like they just stayed home. They did not decide to vote for Kamala.
Yeah. Okay. The thing I wanted to say, but I lost my train of thought, is I think you had mentioned, but yeah, I think one of the things I was reading a lot this morning, there was this kind of like sentiment among the Democrats and liberals in America that they wanted Harris to return to the old style of like political theater in America, and that with like Biden's election in 2020, we had been like over kind of this MAGA era, and I think that kind of fundamentally shows what like the liberal project is right now. It's far right politics with an old school face. Like they want to like be polite and they want to go back to this kind of like civil political theater, but without acknowledging the fact that the landscape has very much changed. We've had COVID and all these escalating crises, and people do not want the old guard. I think a huge mistake in bringing out Cheney is that a MAGA voter isn't going to look at Cheney and be like, that's my BFF. They're going to see him as just like elite. There's a political elite, and I think a lot of people are like, especially like MAGA voters, and even in Canada, as you see like Poilievre's popularity growing, they want some sort of populist. They want someone who's like them, who's anti-elite, even though these people literally aren't, because there's no one else who's offering another political alternative. Yeah. And I think this was an anecdote, I think, from my boss, shout out Martin, but I think he was talking to somebody who like worked in the Tory camp, and they had mentioned that if there was no Bernie Sanders on the left, they're going to go for one on the right. So the fact that there's no appealing kind of force on the political left showed that there's like a massive gap, and that is exactly where a lot of these voters could be, instead of pandering to this middle, this kind of imagined Republican liberal voter that doesn't exist anymore. This
imagined voter who's like, oh, is it going to be Harris today or is it going to be Trump?
No one thinks like that. No one thinks like that anymore. And yeah, it's funny. I'm watching Scandal right now. I'm rewatching Shonda Rhimes' Scandal. And it was kind of like, you can tell it was shot in the Obama era, because there's like the president is Republican, and they always talk about him being like a rhino, which is like Republican in name only. And I really think we've seen a flip of that, which is just like Dino, which is like Democrat in name only. You have like, you can like look at the Liberal Party here, NDP, and you're like, these are no longer social democrat parties, they are conservative parties.
Oh yeah, they're just kind of different. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is like, America is run by two different right-wing parties, right? And it's like, you have one, of course, which has like the the BLM stickers and does maybe like the pandering towards a more progressive crowd, and the other one is just blatantly against it. But like at the end of the day, it's like they're both kind of running the same ship.
Yeah. And I have to say, I think what the Republican Party gets right and what I think the conservative movement in Canada is getting right on a whole is that while like the Democrats want a return, and by Democrats I also mean like I guess like liberals in general, they kind of want the return to like the old like political order versus the conservatives have acknowledged the fact that we cannot return to that, and like they want to have, I don't know, maybe some imagined historical greatness brought back or some like ethno-nationalist like white state in the future that
they
makes
want,
things
like, a
better for
purge.
people. Yeah, they want something different. And I think they're offering something different, and that is what is appealing to people because people do not want what is the same.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's like you're saying this before. Like, there's this kind of like hunger, right, for this kind of like anti-elite politics, right? And of course, the right wingers are like, oh, well, if the left's not going to do it, then obviously we're going to do it, right? Yeah. That's how you have like Polyev. Polyev is takes so many cues from Trump. It's like, I mean, when I worked in like Ottawa, there's like I was talking to like some MPs, and they're saying like just the tone of the party has shifted, right? Where before you had maybe like this idea of like politeness or this kind of like, well, you know, we're from different parties, but we're all serving the same country. Now it's like with like Polyev in charge, you have there's so much more clamoring, so much more yelling, so much more heckling, right? And it's working to his favor, right?
It is.
Because it taps into that kind of like whatever you want to imagine of like middle Canada, middle America, these kinds of like this frustration with how things are, with like material life has gotten worse, right? Price of food is up. It's hard to find a job. Things don't pay as well. Cost of living is high, and people being squeezed by this. And you have Polyev, who's able to like take that kind of like emotion, that core emotion, and then just point the blame at like immigrants, point the blame at like the Chinese, point the blame like elsewhere, right? He validates the emotion, but then he doesn't really draw people towards maybe whatever like actual fundamental changes need to happen.
Yeah, because Polyev, I will say, I've watched some of his videos, and I don't know, he's pretty compelling. I'm like, okay, maybe I do need this tax axed. But then you actually look at his like platform, you're like, oh, he's gonna axe taxes for like corporate elites. Like, it's not gonna really like change much. Like this is like axing like the federal sales tax on homes like isn't gonna lead to more affordable housing. What actually will lead to more affordable housing is like a socialized policy like public housing. But yeah, there's no one offering that. I feel like it's a big failure of the NDP just to be like, and the Liberals too, just to be like,
it's such an opportunity for them.
It's just a huge opportunity to be like, you guys want houses or healthcare, we can provide that. And then I think, yeah, the conservatives are really tapping into that fear, and that, like, yeah, as you said, the material conditions have gotten so much worse. It's so difficult to get a family doctor in Quebec right now.
I just lost mine.
That sucks. I don't have one.
I lost mine. Mine just went private. I didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah, that literally sucks. Yeah, that's it. I'm just like, that sucks.
Yeah. Just one final point on the American elections. I think there's something really interesting, because you were mentioning before about elections in like the UK, and I think something interesting that happened in the UK election over the summer was that there was 5 independents who were able to win, and all these independents organized around Palestine, right? And these are like incredible. These were ridings with like lots of Muslim population, and were Palestine organizers all worked together towards this kind of electoral front, and were able to get 5 representatives elected. I think they commonly like work with like Jeremy Corbyn as well.
He's back.
He's back. Never left. I'm kind of curious, like looking at Michigan, looking at that in the UK. I'm kind of curious how that is good, if and how it's going to show up in Canada. Because you have,
I'm curious too.
There's this it's like this like Muslim Canadian lobby which talks about like the actual voting power Muslims have in a lot of, I think they named like something more than 70 ridings in Canada, where the Muslim population in those ridings are often exceed the kind of like percentage it's going to take to win a riding. So a lot of these ridings, the Muslim population could potentially be like kingmakers, right? And especially with the next election, it's going to be close. There's going to be lots of tight races between Liberals, Bloc, NDP. There's going to be tons of 3-way races. I'm going to be curious to see if we do see that kind of like Palestine, if Palestine does show up as an issue in federal elections. Because I think what we see in Michigan, it does, and it costs Kamala Michigan, which is an incredibly important state that Joe Biden won like handedly back in 2020, right? She lost that because of the Palestine stance. Since we see 5 independents in the UK get elected on the issue of Palestine, I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to show up in Canada.
I am too. I think Canada, because we have such a similar parliamentary system to the UK, we are lucky in the fact that there's just a lot more candidates. So I don't actually, I'm thinking of the independent like MPs I know the Ontario MPP Sarah Jama is an independent, because she was expelled from the caucus.
Of course.
But
she wore her keffiyeh and
but I think she's an example of someone who's like a very high profile independent politician who may make a change. And yeah, I feel like, things could be, things are interesting. I feel like there's gonna be a lot of three-way races. I haven't really seen any true mobilizing and action around it, but I think as we see like the provincial election results roll in, and they're honestly like, there you have like the surprise NDP votes and some surprise Liberal provinces like New Brunswick, but then also the return and like the continuing power of like the Sask party and also the UCP party, which if you want to talk about kind of like American populist politics, Danielle Smith, man, she's doing it. They just passed a motion saying CO2 is good for plants.
Hell yeah.
Finally.
Finally.
Yeah.
I think I saw some poll that was like, that suggested that Alberta supports Donald Trump more than the average in America.
That's so interesting.
Approval ratings for Trump in Alberta are higher than that in the rest of in like the average in America, which I think is like which adds to the point about like how it affects us, right? Because of course there's these actual material policies like maybe like tariffs or these free trade agreements, right, that we have with the U.S., our largest trading partner. Those are obviously going to be effective if Trump comes in and is going to put a tariff on any goods that are not made in the U.S. like he said he's going to. There's also the question about literally like I think like 8 million people he wants to deport. But there is the kind of like thing that happens where like because we're kind of like we're so tied to the U.S. We're so like our tastes are set by the American tastes. It's so interesting to see how the effect of Trump, how that spills over, and how specifically it's Alberta that kind of like begins hungering for someone like Trump.
Yeah, and I wonder how we'll respond. I think there's a kind of this Canadian urge to prove our exceptionalism. I think we did it when Kevin O'Leary was running. I think he started running for PC after Trump was running, and everyone was kind of shaking their head and being like, that's never going to happen here. And so I think in a sense, Canadians might be underprepared for this level of like right-wing populism because we like to see ourselves as so special and different.
Yeah, I mean, last time I checked the polls in Canada, it was like kind of like a blowout for the Conservatives.
Yeah, I'm
something like 224 seats, which is well above like the 175 needed to secure majority.
I'm originally from Ontario, and I'm pretty sure they like did a poll recently, and they're like, "Do you approve of Doug Ford? And would you want to see him like guillotine in the square?" And it was like 60% of people were like, "Yeah, I hate that guy." But then it's like, who would you elect for next election? They're like Conservatives. Yeah. And so it's like,
that's interesting.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. American elections, Donald Trump just won.
Well, watch this space, I guess.
Yeah. Watch this space. All of America.
Literally all of America.
Let's go on to our first topic. Well, I guess our second topic.
Okay. Yeah.
Did you hear about, what do you think about genocide?
I think it's bad.
What do you think about human rights?
I would say at large something I support.
All right. Well, unfortunately, recently there's been a place about genocide and human rights that has shut down. Concordia has shut down the Institute of Genocide and Human Rights Studies to cut costs. I see this shared a lot in little social media circles online.
The Instagram stories.
People are like, oh no. Of course now they're closing the Institute of Genocide and Human Rights Studies to cut costs. This is such a terrible loss. I will admit, at first when I saw the news, I was like, we should be studying those things.
Yes, me too. I will say I saw just the headline and sent it to my roommate group chat and went, oh, because both my roommates go to Concordia. And then I read the article.
Tell me.
Yeah, so I read the article.
I'm happy you brought this up as a topic today.
Yeah, so I read the article. I think the first thing was that actually this closure had been planned for a while. I think it was last spring. They were choosing to phase it out, and I was like, okay. I was just kind of looking. The CTV news article is not very descriptive, so I went to like the website, and shockingly, as you would believe, these people haven't said anything on Palestine in the past year. They actually haven't said anything on Palestine ever in probably the past, like the 5-year archive I found on their website. And I was then kind of unsurprised because I feel like human rights has become such a neutral, neutralizer. It's just like a neutral thing. That
it's
many
just
people,
kind of just something to signal.
It's just something that floats around. It's like human rights. Obviously, everyone thinks they're bad, but then it kind of depoliticizes the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And can ask as like a masquerade for just policy wonks who don't want any real systemic change.
Yeah, and what I'm really happy you flagged this because I remember you asked me about it, and I was like, oh yeah, I just saw that. I just saw the headline, and I'm like, this is I'm against cuts. to any kind of education thing.
Me too.
And like I'm
Obviously
in support of
genocide.
anything. Yeah, I'm obviously against genocide. But then you actually look through the research they do, and it's exactly what you're saying.
It's not good.
They're just policy wonks, right?
Yeah,
they're just kind of
they're center or to center right. A lot of their policies, if you look at their recent podcasts, are just about like how Beijing has helped Russia's war in Ukraine or TikTok disinformation. And it's really telling that obviously I am no tanky. I have no love towards like Putin or the PRC.
Of course,
But it's very interesting how these major like threats to human rights and genocide are Russia and China. So you can kind of see they're engaging in these like Cold War style politics that want to position the West and Canada as like the safe haven, as the savior and the protector of these human rights. But they're not actually talking about human rights and genocides that aren't affecting non-Westerners, not Europeans. There's no mention of like Palestine or the Rohingya genocide or like, I don't know, the famine in Yemen. So it is really telling to show. Anyways, I just thought it was interesting because so many people I know shared it. Ostensible leftists. This morning, I saw someone who I consider a pretty smart person post it on their story with the caption, "They're saying the quiet part out loud now, huh?" And I'm like, I don't think the people who are running this institute are your friends. They're not your comrades. They wouldn't be like advocating for the Palestinians' rights at the UN. These are the people who want to basically depoliticize genocide so it becomes something that we don't really have to worry about or think critically about.
Folks, it doesn't take much to just read beyond the headlines.
No, this is kind of similar to when the Nazi was in parliament and everyone stood up and clapped. And they're like, he's fighting Russia. And I'm like, who was fighting Russia at that time? And you're like, what genocide are they looking at? And you're like, it's only kind of like Holodomor and the Holocaust and these like kind of white ones that are often historicized as these like spontaneous, out of nowhere mass crises and are not at all connected to like larger forms of globalization and imperialism.
I'm mixing up my papers.
Yeah. But anyways, all of this is to say is that the Genocide and Human Rights Institute at Concordia, this is not your Frankfurt School. This is not like a bunch of Marxist-Leninists who are trotting out radical thought. This is very much like by the books policy wonks.
Lanyard wearing, suit wearing policy
UN,
wonks.
model UN nerds. Like,
It's like, I mean, sometimes there's like good research they can do, you know. Sometimes they can get into the details of like some stuff, but like I'll just like breezing through the things they're doing. It's just clearly like these people are just taking up resources to like write stuff that's like so like milquetoast. That's not like challenging in any real way.
And again, I want to emphasize, I am not for education cuts. I probably would prefer that this place stayed open, even if I do not politically agree with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want people to know about this because I think I've just seen so much discourse about this being a super bad thing, and I'm like, I don't know, man.
I think to go in a bit into like the kind of positions they take, right? So I was looking at like after you flagged it, I went through their like different like reports. One of them was like the white paper on combating anti-Semitism online. Now I will say whenever I see something written like this, it's like to me it's just like boop, boop, policy wonk. It's just kind of like how are we gonna deal with hate online? And then it's just like it's a long-winded report.
Yeah, and they're like, hey, where does it come from? I'm not gonna tell you.
Yeah. That's none of my business.
Yeah, they're like, it just emerged one day.
Yeah. Like, oh, I wonder what are potentially the material circumstances that bring about these kinds of beliefs, and it's like,
it's like it always comes from the outside, never from within.
It's just them going like,
like, don't worry about it. They're like, don't worry about it, kitten.
Okay, yay. No, I was looking through the combating anti-Semitism online white paper. And I was like, okay, this is. I mean, I always consider these things like good, like bellwethers for like what is like an institute's or like a think tank's kind of like position, what kind of ideology they work with. And like I just did like a little like Control F search. I went IHRA, and there was mentioned 8 times. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is something that's been kind of like incredibly contentious among the different like Jewish institutions. Most like we've had Niall and Sarah Boivin from IJV come onto the show to talk about the way that some Jewish institutions like the I forget their names now. Different like they're essentially they have some of these institutions which are essentially just Israel lobby groups, and they're trying to rally up support for Israel. And one of the ways they do that is through this IHRA definition, right? And you had some people who mobilized against Montreal using that definition, but in Canada they've accepted it. In fact, recently there's been a development where it's been kind of like this guiding thing, and it's quite dangerous for Palestinians because it looks at Palestinian kind of like criticism of Israel and even Jewish criticism of Israel as like anti-Semitism, right? It lumps it into that kind of category, which is incredibly problematic, which is kind of like not really doesn't really engender discussion at all. It's much more about like censorship. And here we have the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies is just supporting it. In the recommendations they make was just to kind of like further accept the definition brought forward by the IHRA. And it's just, I mean, this stuff is just completely milquetoast kind of like center right, even like right wing kind of like policies, right? And that kind of tells you what they're kind of about. And I looked up this guy Gursky. He I think he's the president of the I guess was the president of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. He wrote this thing in where is this the?
It was something with Postmedia, wasn't it?
This is the Cochrane Times. Yeah, it is Postmedia. Yeah, they're using the Postmedia platform, but. This is something he wrote this year in October 22nd. Parliament Hill attack. 10 years later, jihadi terrorism still threatens us. This is such like a.
It's like a throwback.
It is a throwback. Yeah. I mean, this whole piece is a throwback. I mean, he used to work for the CSIS. He used to work specifically in kind of like Islamist, like terrorist kind of stuff. And here he is talking about like the Parliament Hill attack as an example of like jihadi terrorism. Essentially, the whole piece is kind of like, guys, we should still be afraid. And he says in the piece, like, even though most things do point that right-wing extremism and terrorism is the growing threat, let's not forget about the jihadis.
Yeah.
And even just say jihadi terrorism is like kind of like...
It's like ding, ding, ding. Yeah, You're like, oh, red flag.
It's such a kind of old school way of like talking about it. And I don't know. I mean, this kind of shows you the kind of like positioning of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights
mentioned
Studies.
Before, I think these are people who like really want to solidify like the West's position as like the savior and always seeing the threat coming from this like mysterious Orientalist like enemy. And you know what? I'm gonna Orientalize the Russians. They were Orientalists for a long time. They can be Asian now. Only this time.
Well,
Only
they do turn them into Asian. Anytime they're like acting up, people are like, "What are they? A bunch of Asians?"
Yeah, they're like, if they're like on the good side, they're European, but now they're on the bad side. They're like, this invisible Asian mob.
Yeah, you're acting kind of Asian now.
Yeah, they're being kind of sneaky.
Yeah. No, those are always kind of, hilarious, but then of course concerning to see.
Yes, it definitely is.
Yeah. So Montreal, the MIGS, Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Research. Rest in peace.
You got a good one.
Yeah, and as you were going out, you kind of fooled some people about what you're about.
Yeah, I was gonna say good name. Because, like, I think a lot of people, I don't think a lot of people who shared that Instagram story are going to think about it. They're just like, damn, so sad the Genocide Center got shut down.
Yeah. Well, now with the Metropolis listeners will know now. Metropolis listeners are in the know, and now anytime you see people talking about that, you can be like, hey, actually.
It's kind of sus.
Yeah. Kind of weird. Kind of weird people. I mean, even, like, we're talking about this whole thing about, like, human rights-centered approaches are always, like, mostly just to kind of, like, embolden, like, Western perspectives.
Totally.
Or, like, give consent to like Western governments to like there's no human rights in China, so that's why we need Canada to go to China to bring human rights there,
Yeah, a human rights thing, I feel like it becomes a difficult position to argue against because like obviously everybody wants human rights. Like that's not what people don't like about an organization like that. It's how this is weaponized to kind of push forward a conservative agenda. Very similar to how human trafficking has been blown out of proportion in a lot of conservative circles because it's very hard to say that you're not for child trafficking, even though like the level they do it is not at all like what is true. But again, it's all about imagining your enemy as an outsider, which I think is like a key tenet of fascism.
It creates like it asks for a savior, It's like, oh no, these poor people.
It kind of like denies the fact that any of these problems might be structural or like integral to I don't know, the country we're in, the systems we live in, and always posits it on the outside. I think very tellingly, like this place doesn't really say anything about Canada's own genocide of Indigenous peoples. Because of course the genocide has to be like Putin and Russia and China who are doing the genocide. They also don't really say anything about like the Uyghur genocide either. So like actually don't really know what their stance is. They kind of say nothing. They don't really say anything.
I don't think. I mean, they're not doing much.
They're not doing much. No.
I think it's often slow days at the office over there.
I also will say, I think people kind of like don't understand what like an academic institute is. I went to McGill, again, bringing this up, but like flex.
Flexing on this
nerd alert. But an institute, like I guess it sounds really fancy, but at least when I was an undergrad, the institute was like 2 guys, and they wouldn't have like a real physical space. It would be like an email and a website, and they're supposedly doing research, but it's gonna take like 7 months to get back to because everyone's on sabbatical. Like these aren't really like
you could start an institute.
You could start it, there was a you could start an institute. Like this isn't an actual, like it's not like they have like a building and they're like running this like agenda. They are just, it's probably like in this case like one guy in an email.
Yeah, it's like the Wizard of Oz, you know, just like this kind of big show of like, we're the institute we're a public policy think tank institute. We're 2 guys and we're just talking about being online too much.
Yeah, they're like hate, it's bad.
Yeah. Hate, it's bad. We're against it actually. And then governments are like, here is $7 million for this report.
Yeah, and
I'm not actually. I'm just making up a situation. Yeah. Are there any think tanks you like?
I kind of like the CCPA, the Canadian Center of Policy Alternatives. I think they're
they do good work.
pretty good. I look forward to reading their alternative budget every year. I send it to my friends who work in government, and they always go, "Damn, it's not what my budget is." I like that one. That's actually it. I don't really know that many think tanks. No. If you know more than 2 think tanks, it's like maybe you should start thinking about your social life. Maybe not to nerd shame anyone here.
Okay, I just got nerd shamed.
Sorry. What's your favorite think tank?
I really like CCPA. Sometimes I think the stuff that comes out of broadband, sometimes I find is like kind of like,
I know those people.
Is worthy of engagement. There's the CFPI as well, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. They kind of do like
I think I've seen them. Yeah.
They do stuff that's sort of like maybe the opposite of like the genocide and human rights stuff. Not that they're pro genocide, but they kind of like put a lot of stuff that's kind of like challenges mainstream kind of Canadian like thinking about like China.
Oh, that's good.
And kind of tries to like offer an alternative foreign policy position. Because I mean, as far as foreign policy is concerned, most of the major Canadian parties are all kind of in lockstep about it.
Yeah.
And I think the work that CFPI is doing is kind of important against it. Is there anything else?
CGPA, like Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, is that a think tank?
I think they're an advocacy group. Yeah.
Well, I get their emails.
Yeah. No. Shout out to them too. Shout out to them. But yeah. It doesn't take much to create think tanks. They come and go. Guys.
Famously, it's all in here. Same with the institute. Legit. Everything you need for a think tank or institute, you got like with the
institute was the friends we made along the way.
Literally, it's in your heart.
Okay. All right. All right, so the Canadian Montreal Institute, goodbye, good luck on your next ventures of talking about hate. Oh, maybe, is it too late? Yeah, just one little quick mention. I remember that we're talking about how these institutes never really get into the meat of like where this hate comes from, right? Mm-hmm. It's always this thing that exists and we must be against it, but like they never talk about the actual material.
They're very ahistorical.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They're like, where did they come from?
Yeah. It's like, again, Ontario public school education was just like the Holocaust just happened.
Yeah.
They just decided one day to blame Jewish people for the economy.
Don't
ask about like the pogroms or anything that happened before that. Like,
which is something I think which like let's actually no. Before we move on, I want to talk about the work an institute about genocide and human rights studies could be doing, right? Because I think when I think about kind of like really kind of important work that like moves the needle on those kinds of things. I think about like Mike Davis's like late Victorian Holocausts, and he kind of talks about like he positions the Holocaust as this event that's been in this series of kind of like mass death because of like colonialism and capitalism expanding, right? And you have these massive populations there. Like the one he talks about. Like the key one he talks about is like the famine in India caused by the Raj, the British Raj.
Yeah.
And he calls this a Holocaust as well. And he kind of looks at this kind of like genocide as an example of like, as a result of like whatever, like capitalist and colonial state expanding and kind of like putting this population and then their needs and their like the needs for sustenance in life kind of secondary to the needs of the colonial government. Mm-hmm. And that's how he positions it, which I think is like, to me, I remember it was really eye-opening because like people talk about like, I mean, when I grew up, it's like people talk about the Holocaust in maybe in a similar way that you kind of like referred to before, where people are like, it just happened. And there's not really too much discussion about like where it came from, you know? And I think about Mike Davis's book, Late Victorian Holocaust. I was thinking about, there's that documentary series. It's like a 4-part miniseries by Raoul Peck where he talks about the Holocaust and how it came to be. And it's sort of this like, he talks about it as like Germany and Italy as sort of late to the colonial game.
Yeah.
And so how they would just wanted to do colonialism, but like to other Europeans.
Yeah.
And to Europeans, they're like, yo, what are you doing? friendly fire.
They're like, what if it happened here?
yeah. Like, oh my goodness.
Literally, what if it happened to us? But I guess to that point, like what an institute studying genocide could actually do. I think what's really missing from this and missing from our understanding of these mass death events is how it ties into these broader like ideologies of colonialism and capitalism. I think like if you want to understand a mass death like event like the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide, it is, and even like the Holodomor, it's to understand how our like system of capitalism is predicated on the exploitation of people, of land, of resources, to the point where these mass deaths have to occur. Like there is no other option. And I think the fact that you can see like mass deaths, casualty events happen in basically every single continent just shows that like this form of global neoliberal democracy, which is, I guess, built on like these larger legacies of like feudalism and authoritarianism, are slowly turning towards fascism because it does depend on the subjugation of minority populations, so that a majority population can feel good about themselves. They can feel like the hero. They can feel like the chosen population while they have the scapegoat.
I really like that point you made before about how like this institute there's no research being done about like indigenous genocide here in like, North America. Right?
Nothing about the Rohingya genocide, which was a very high-profile genocide in like 2017.
Incredibly recent.
Yes.
Nothing about those.
Nothing in the TRC report, which is, I guess, another like a way you can look at genocide happening over a long period of time, and how you can also look at, I don't know, like parts of Canada as places that are actively undergoing this sort of colonialism. But again, that would challenge this liberal status quo, which is the last thing a think tank like this wants to do.
That's not their job. Their thing is to give consent to Canada and whatever institutions to go out to other these kind of the second world, the third world, and
I will say I feel like you can do a lot of interesting scholarship about these mass death events. There's a lot of interesting stuff about how I think a lot of people want to position something. I just keep bringing up the Holocaust because it's probably the most talked about mass death event in like Canadian public memory, but people like to talk about that as this like out of nowhere singular event when it really belies the fact that stuff like anti-Semitism and homophobia and racism and xenophobia are the bedrock of these empires, and the American Empire and like the Canadian Empire and all these empires that we find ourselves a part of.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Another piece of news. In other news, we're gonna bring things back to back to I don't know, back to basics. No, back to bridges. On October 22nd, 2 arrests were made after environmental protesters blocked the Jacques Cartier Bridge. You hear about this?
I did hear about this. It kind of flew under the radar, though. I kind of heard about it, and I was like, likely thing for them to do.
Yeah.
I feel like people block bridges all the time in Quebec.
It is, it is kind of something that happens. I mean, they did during the it happened during the Oka crisis. It happened during the student strikes.
Yeah, it's part of our heritage,
and rightfully so. I think Montreal's an island.
Famously an island. Don't forget that.
Yeah. And don't let them forget it.
Yeah. So many people are like, "It's an island," and I'm like, "Yeah." Didn't you drive here? And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "You passed 2 rivers," and they're like, "I didn't notice." And I'm like,
If you look at it, people are surprised by that. It's funny. It's like, just look at the map.
It's it's like, I'm not sure what to tell you.
It's a big island, sure, but it's definitely an island. Yeah. Well, these 2 environmental activists with the Antigone Collective as well as Last Generation went on top of the Jacques Cartier Bridge. They unfurled a banner that said, "Oil is killing us." It was like 5 a.m. I saw some of the pictures. Really, the pictures were kind of moving because there's like early sunset, like sunrise rather, like the sky is pink, and you see the climbers like looking over into the horizon, and like you can kind of it's like a palpable sense of like their heart is in this, like this is clearly like a big moment for them.
You know that like every local news outlet in Montreal was so happy they got to use the drone they bought.
Oh yeah.
They're like, break that thing out. This is the moment.
Get the drone to the bridge
right now.
There's
so few moments to get a good drone shot, but this is one of them.
There's a few things I want to talk about this. I'm gonna do some finger wagging. I'm always kind of like, especially recently, I'm always thinking about like leverage and like strategy politically, right? Because you see there's like lots of different avenues you can take. And I was like really curious about this one because I mean, of course, there's like a big like publicity intent. This wants to get as much attention as possible and then divert it towards to get people thinking about the inaction that the federal government is doing. Of course, provincial government as well on I think provincial, but they do mostly name the federal government. It's like most of the demands that they're saying were targeted towards the federal government about them not really like making any commitments. Like, what was it? They're doing this together with Last Generation Canada and Antigone Collective to demand real climate action from the federal government. They demand that Canada implement a national emergency management agency and demanding that Canada back the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to end fossil fuels by 2030. That's why these people climb this bridge today, to raise an alarm on this and to break through the status quo. I support these climbers.
Me too. Yeah.
I support them.
I hear a but.
But.
Oh.
But. I support them critically, you know, because I think these actions, as like talking to most people, I will be like, absolutely, I support them. I think it's important to be spreading this message across, especially as things get worse, right? It's like middle of November, and it's like, maybe not middle of November, it's early November, and it's like 20 degrees out.
Yeah.
Which is like nice, but completely not normal. And then it's going to be incredibly snowy and cold winter, I hear. Inclement weather is going to be the things are going to be getting much worse, I think, weather-wise, and I think it's important to have these kinds of moments to sort of like ring the bell, to be in the streets, to be like, hey, things need to like change, you know. And you have quite the reaction from conservatives towards these kinds of actions. This is not the first time these groups have done this. They did this 5 years ago on the Jacques Cartier Bridge as well. They unfurled the banner to try and remind people, commuters, of course, coming in from Longueuil, drivers mostly, that, hey, by the way, government's not doing much, hasn't done much in the last 5 years, and here they are reminding us again. I guess the criticism I have, or the open question I have is like, I think about leverage. I think about like, how do you actually like gain power? And I think these are actions that are not really, I mean, to be fair, these are not actions about gaining power. These are actions about kind of like bringing something to the public front, right? Publicizing, getting some people to think about this idea, getting people to think about government inaction on climate change, which I think it works. I think on that front, I think it works.
I think it does to a limited extent. I think it only captures the news cycle attention for a very short period of time, which is the issue.
Yeah.
I also would agree. I like by and large support these people. I'm sure unfurling a banner isn't going to like immediately enact a Green New Deal, but it's a largely symbolic act. And I think if the left does anything, as we like to wag our fingers at symbolic acts for not being like efficient enough, versus like, I think you look at someone like the right and like people have like fuck Trudeau signs. Can I swear on this show?
Yeah. You're quoting something.
I'm quoting something. They have like fuck Trudeau signs, and they can have like Confederate flags and all these like racist epithets. And those are just kind of seen as like adding to a larger chorus. And I do think there is, I guess, a benefit of like acts in the public sphere that support climate action, because there's just not a lot of public actions about that period. And I also need to say, anytime someone is like against civil disobedience, you probably shouldn't be on their side.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like civil disobedience is cool. We can't forget that.
It is such an important tool. Yeah. There's been quite a few elected officials who are less understanding, less into this idea of civil disobedience.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, of course, I was saying there's this part of me that's critical about these kinds of actions and their limitations. But whenever I see these like elected officials coming out against them, it makes me support them even more. Yeah. Because it's like, guys, of course, this is like symbolic, but like, what, are you going to be against the symbolic as well? Like, that's like completely like ridiculous to me. Here, I have some, this is from Environment Minister Benoit Charette. This is on Twitter. Completely unjustifiable and totally reprehensible. These people do nothing to help the environment. They only frustrate people. That's like...
It's also like, my guy, you're the environment minister. You're the one who can like, I mean, like, I guess Quebec has stopped drilling oil, but like, you're the one in the position to make change. And I feel like this is your constituents speaking out. I don't think it's unjustifiable at all. And I do think it's kind of like, and I don't know if you talked about this, but both these people were arrested. I think one of them was arrested put into jail for 9 days, which I think is like
Olivier Huard.
Yeah, which is a really big departure from past police action towards climate activists. In the past, you'll just get kettled for like 6 hours and you'll leave. But I think we've actually seen the SBVM be more authoritarian when it comes to journalists and activists. I mean, Savannah Craig, she was like charged. Those charges were dropped, but shout out Savannah.
Now at APTN.
Yeah, doing good stuff. But
we miss you.
But yeah, you look and you're like, okay, I think in this kind of like post-COVID era, I think we're kind of, I feel like there's a reticence on the left to utilize these public spaces, but also you see these mass public movements like the Palestine movement and these sort of like environmental movements being met with like no response from the political left establishment, which I think does add to the futility of these things. Because I guess like in the past when we've had the student strikes in 2012 and we had like hundreds of thousands of people on the street, the hikes, they were canceled, if I remember correctly. And so you had this like mass movement and then something actionable, which was like, I guess, inspiring and like a big win. But now you have something like the climate march with equal, if not like, more people hitting the streets. And
Montreal had
like a million people, had like a huge amount of people.
Half a million people. It was like the largest turnout for any of those climate
strikes. How did I think
it
was
world.
A million?
I wish.
But yeah, you have like a huge climate turnout, and you have turnouts for like these anti-war movements, and it's kind of like met with nothing because there's no one on the political establishment, even the left, who wants to kind of like take the side of these protesters.
Right, they don't want to bring them.
So which is like, I guess when you look at if you're a cynic, you can look at this burner unfolding and be like, idiot, they're not going to do anything. But I think the police state has gotten a lot stricter, and I feel like there's more of an illusion that there's less of a choice to do in terms of direct action, because so many direct actions have also been co-opted by the government. Like, I don't know, it's so easy to like look at these like recent union movements and be like, that's so awesome that people are like marching, but it's like so many of these people are just like white collar union workers who are just kind of like doing what the government wants for like this kind of like political theater of just pretending like there's actual action when there's no change.
Right. Just the semblance of change. The photo opportunity. But then...
and I guess maybe this just goes back to what we were saying before, where like we just can't play politics like we used to 10 years ago. We're in a very different environment. That's true, you can't just banner, and like I love a banner drop, love that stuff. But I feel like a banner drop or blocking a bridge blockade was huge like 25 years ago, and I'm like, we should still do that, but that can't be our only tactic now that we have like Amazon Boston Mechanic dogs that can like kill you remotely. You gotta like step up.
No,
I'm also like not like an activist, so I take my criticism with like a massive grain of salt.
Sure. But I think you have a good like overview on these things. It's interesting you bring up this thing about it being this kind of old school thing, right? This old school tactic, because it absolutely, what it reminded me of was like, it's like the old like 90s kind of like Greenpeace kind of stunts. The famous one I can think of is like when Stephen Guilbeault, the current Liberal Environment Minister, MP for Laurier Sainte Marie, he became sort of like popularized or known for his stunt with Greenpeace, where he scaled the CN Tower.
I don't really like Guilbeault, but that's cool.
It's
pretty cool.
Of course, yeah. I mean, like, if we're gonna commend these people for climbing the Jacques Cartier Bridge, like you gotta give it to.
Yeah, I'll give them that. Yeah, I personally don't think I could do that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's like that. There's that Sam Morril bit about how like at any protest, white people are gonna be climbing shit.
Oh, absolutely. White people love to climb shit.
I'll be in the trees.
But I think like now that this like urge to climb stuff has been like replaced by like rock climbing gyms, which is another way that the liberal order has subsumed these direct action policies.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm a V5.
I don't know what that means. But yeah, this was before the whole climbing gym thing. So imagine the grip strength that he had to develop to climb the CN Tower.
I will say now, if anything, because of bouldering gyms and rock climbing gyms,
we should be doing it more.
We have like it's like the education has gone up. You know, like the climbing literacy is now up for a broader
Did he free
selection.
climb it, or was he attached to anything?
He must have been attached. I think.
I don't know. Free climbing is nuts.
I think there's a lots of like, I think for those kinds of structures, there's lots to attach to. A free climb would be like terrifying. Anyways, to bring it back to the point, I think this action reminds me, like you were saying, of these kinds of like older school types of like actions to get like attention. Guilbeault did this in like the 90s for like Greenpeace. I think it was the 90s, might have been early 2000s for Greenpeace. Now he's environment minister. Perhaps will these two people become environment ministers? Who is to say? But it's more just to point out this kind of like,
they're searching for the next liberal shill in the prisons of the climate activists.
Who's like who can? Yeah, it's like who can climb the tallest thing becomes the next liberal
There's like
environment
winning some
minister.
money, and they're like, if you drop any like relevant socialist policies, you can have a seat at the next government.
I think there's something. These things make me think about like what the theory of change is for these people. Because I remember talking to some climate activist friends, because I didn't know the Antigone Collective or Last Generation too much. I just know they're sort of like kind of like adjacent to like Extinction Rebellion, which does these big like PR stunts as well.
Honestly, same.
I think Antigone was responsible for the like they blocked like the entrance to the airport, I think, over the summer.
Yes.
and they're kind of connected to that, which I think like you have this thing of like they're trying to publicize these things, but then like what is the assumption there? I think to me it sounds like the assumption is that not enough people or we're not doing enough about like climate change, so we need to sort of like interrupt the flow of like whatever like everyday life to kind of like get people kind of activated. And of course like this bridge, maybe I don't know how much the CN Tower blocks the flow of everyday life, but I know the bridge blockade, the bridge banner drop, they had to close down the bridge completely for like commuter traffic, right? And like people were disturbed, or they were kind of like, or their everyday kind of thing was like disturbed, right? And now they're forced to think about the action and whether or not they support it. It did seem like there was kind of a mix of support for it. But the assumption there is that like that not enough people know, or that not enough people are like I'm kind of.
I think a lot of people know. I think this style of like this style of civil disobedience where like you interrupt the flow of daily life is very hard to do now, just because of the attention economy we're in. Our lives are so fragmented, and so we're like so used to being this like hyper modern situation where like people can be like scrolling on TikTok and playing Subway Surfer, and like maybe they're in their car and the road happens to be blocked, but they can just look away really easy. And so I think I again, not an activist, but I do think that a lot of people probably know what climate change is, and maybe a banner full reminding them is just kind of like piss them off. But because I don't think you see the right doing so many like direct action stunts. They're mobilizing and their organizing is often happening online, which is where a lot of these people are getting radicalized, and they're doing it through, I don't know, the proliferation of like memes and communication and creating that network, which I think speaks to the moment we're in, especially like post-pandemic, this like hyper connective like late stage capitalism.
I mean, it's like the statement from Last Generation, right? They're trying to break through the status quo, and I mean these actions absolutely do that, right? It interrupts the status quo.
But I also think maybe they don't anymore because we're so used to them.
Interesting. Because of like whatever, like our attention.
There's just been so many bridge. This is now I'm the cynic, but there's been so many.
I've kind of flipped. I'm like,
but I mean like I do support them, but I'm like I just don't know if that the status quo is going to be broken by the bridge as much. But also I think they should still do it. Yeah.
I think it's an important necessary part of whatever.
I support them. And you know what? Actions. If someone wanted to drop a banner every day on the bridge, I'd be like, yeah, fine.
That'd be impressive.
That's probably good. It's probably better that someone does like 17 basically like meaningless symbolic acts a day than like doing nothing. So
yeah. No, that's a good way of looking at it. It's
the butterfly effect. Maybe that'll create a ripple of change. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, there's things that I think are like important. Just organizing these kinds of things, like the connections you make, the people who are in support of it.
It creates a culture.
It creates a culture, and it also signals to these people, the organizers, like it shows them they can trust and who's going to be against them, right? I think I could have guessed that most of those like sort of center right politicians in Quebec are going to be against it, but now they know for sure.
Yeah, and they do.
Yeah. It shows who their allies are. I think I want to go through a bit of the there's in City News they have the article about the arrest, and they have some comments from Montrealers. This is from the section called "Montrealers Mixed About Protest." Some motorists were left frustrated by the closure. There's always a problem with these roads, said Raphael Longo. My only way to work is the Jacques Cartier Bridge. Now I have to go to the tunnel, but it's going to take me hours. So it's really, sometimes it's ridiculous.
Honestly, I feel like they just got these people right as they got out of rush hour, so they're going to be pissed off.
Of course, yeah.
I feel like nothing puts you in a worse mood than being in traffic.
I don't know if it's the best way to protest, said another Montrealer. Others, however, were more sympathetic given the cause. If they are at the point of blocking the road, it's because it's important, said Marie-Émilie Gagné.
She seems like a nice lady.
The government have to know what's happening. So for me, it's just something I have to take the metro instead of taking the bridge. So it's just something I have to do. But for them, it's the environment. It's very important for me too. So I quite agree with what they're doing right now.
Maybe such bridge closures will lead to an increased metro ridership, which might, who knows?
I mean, the metro is already kind of overstuffed.
Well, I don't know. Maybe then they're like, oh man, so many bridge closures. Guess we've got to increase the traffic and the frequency.
Maybe we should improve
they're not.
this public transit system.
Yeah, and like the road and our infrastructure.
Added Dave Plante, I'm sure it's disruptive for some people getting to work, but that's kind of the idea of a protest, especially for climate change, which is going to be affecting us in a lot more ways than just a little problem to commute. Thank you, Dave. I think that's
Dave. He's correct.
I think he is incredibly correct on that. Think about what is the inconvenience of a bridge shutting down versus that of like literally like the planet completely
shutting down. Yeah. Small inconvenience. You're like, okay, I see them. Yeah. I hear you, bridge protesters.
You have my support.
Yeah, you're valid.
You're valid
for now.
I mean,
you are. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm like I'm pro these guys.
Yeah. But it's like leverage, power. Those are like the kind of questions, and I kind of wonder what's next for them. If it's going to be more bridge blocks, or if there's going to be.
I mean, I do think it's troubling that like these like just stop oil activists didn't like somebody get like 5 years in prison for throwing like a can of soup on a Van Gogh painting? That's ridiculous. Like I'm like we shouldn't do that. Maybe that didn't happen, and I'm spreading misinformation.
Oh yeah, no, okay, yeah.
Good.
You're against those kinds of painting things?
No, I'm pro those painting things. I'm against people being jailed for 5 years for us as an act of civil disobedience.
Yes,
that
of course.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think that's an important point to kind of bring back up about how 5 years ago the same act by the same people was met with like someone was detained for like a few hours, let go same day. Now Olivier was in. There's a great piece in People by Leah Beaulieu, Krachnov, and Una Barrett about what Olivier Huard went through in his time in jail, like 9 days, completely like it was unprecedented. There's no one had been like arrested for that amount of time for like his similar action as his, and people were kind of like.
Yeah, but I think it goes to show that like when we have this project of like climate action, there also needs to like a project of like greater abolition.
Yeah.
I remember there was a criticism of Andreas Malm's book How to Blow Up a Pipeline that is either in Jacobin or Canadian Dimension that mentioned that there was like kind of no critique of the carceral system, because it's like, yeah, you can blow up as many pipelines as you want and make so many stages, but if everyone's gonna go to jail, that's actually probably a net loss for your movement. So like how do you work in tandem with I don't know, like abolitionists so that like not everyone ends up in jail? Kind of shows how these are all connected.
Yeah, no. Those kinds of that kind of way of Mom's book is interesting because it kind of like it has this kind of, it like portends this future for like these like frustrated environmentalists, where it's like no more. They're not doing like bridge blockades. They're actually doing like sabotage, like industrial sabotage, right?
Yes. I mean, I bet it would feel great to do industrial sabotage.
We do not support that statement. No, I know what you mean though. I know what you mean. It's just the actual kind of like satisfaction of like stopping like something physically that is contributing towards climate change.
Yeah, but then no kind of alternatives. Like, what happens when everyone goes to jail?
Yeah, because you will go to jail.
You will go to jail, and I think his book kind of posits like it's worth it to go to jail for 100 years, and it's like I think a lot of people don't want to go to jail for 100 years.
That book is just trying to get people in trouble.
Yeah, he's like, please blow up the pipeline.
There's like a movie.
It's kind of like an Acme Looney Tunes trap. So you blow up the pipeline, it's like boom, trap. Yeah, literally like Acme weight falling on your head. I watched the movie.
Oh yeah, what'd you think?
It's actually like it's pretty good. I don't think it's like super like there's no like political project beyond it, but I think it's like cool that they took kind of like a pressing issue of our time and made it into like a heist thriller. It's very Ocean's 11.
Yeah. I think it's good to have people thinking about that. I don't know. Whenever I think about these kinds of like again, like I think there is this connection between like a banner drop and like industrial sabotage.
Oh, absolutely.
Because to me, it's like both these things that aren't really movement based. They're kind of like they're still individual actions. Exactly right, and that's the limitation of them, right? It's the same limitation for like something like a banner drop or climbing the CN Tower is the same limitation as like industrial sabotage, which is it's not really, you're not trying to build collective power. You're just kind of trying to do this one kind of like one-off thing, and then you who are like this imagined figure of like whatever, like who's climbing the CN Tower and who's about to do industrial sabotage, you are now arrested, and now you are not part of the movement, and you cannot put. Yeah. We have no longer have access to your talents, your knowledge, your connection. Maybe connection, maybe in some way, of course, yes. But like now you are like removed as like a potential like a piece of a larger struggle towards collective power, right? Mm-hmm. I think that was one of the main issues about them. Do you ever read about the Tikhon like TIQQUN.
I don't think so.
There's this group of like French radicals, and like I think it was like maybe like after 2008, where they were doing stuff like they were like this anonymous group of like French radicals of like incredibly like flowery language that they write with. They wrote the thing like the Coming War, or the Invisible Committee. That's what they also go by, and they talk about stuff about like essentially like they have all this flowery language, and they just get into like just trying to talk about like disrupting like train services and doing like industrial sabotage. And then like I think a few like weeks or months after the book came out, there's this kind of like case of like industrial sabotage in France that happened. Because they were just saying they were just saying like the best thing leftists or anyone who's kind of like cares about the fate of the planet can do is just to do random acts of like violence against industry, which is like that's like I'm saying the same problem there is the same problem as this thing of industrial sabotage, where there's nothing collective.
Yeah, it's not a long-term feasible goal.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think a banner drop and an active industrial sabotage does remind us of how fragile these systems are, and that if all it takes is like a couple people to dismantle a pipeline, this like monolithic, like fossil fuel industry is truly not as powerful as we think, and it really runs on like the consensus of its like financial backers.
Yeah.
And yeah, the consensus of the people. People united.
People united will never be defeated. Yeah. But anyways, those are I don't know, any concluding thoughts on the
No, I'm glad you brought up the sabotage. I feel like that was
because to me it's the same. There's the same kind of like underlying logic of like what can an individual do, right? Because that's often the question that is asked, and of course with reason, right? Because like people hear about whatever atrocity, people hear about like this thing that needs to change, and they're like, what can I do as a person, right?
I do think we were like in a very valid era of critique in the post-Hillary era, where everyone's like, neoliberal climate justice wants you to recycle, but actually it's the fossil fuel industry, which is true. But I think a lot of people took that as like an excuse to like not do anything.
Yeah.
And so I do think there's a value in doing these individual actions if you feel good doing that and it aligns with, I don't know, your life. But it's like, I don't think we should like stop doing these things.
It's
part of the
puzzle. It's one color you can use on your beautiful like
in
palette.
the same way that collective action is not the only thing.
Exactly,
it's a powerful tool, but in small individual actions are also things you should do.
Of course. That's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
You want to think about all these things as options, strategy, which ones to use when. You're not limited to one.
There's no right way. There's no one way to do anything.
Yeah. In fact,
there's many ways to skin a cat.
This is true. What's your favorite way to skin a cat?
No comment.
No comment on the racist question. Next. Next topic. Last topic, actually. Hear a little water break. Hear about you know what else loves water?
A plant.
Valerie Plante. That was a tough segue.
that was a reach.
You got to try. You got to experiment. Valerie Plante, the mayor of Montreal, the first female mayor of Montreal in its 300+ year history, is not seeking re-election next November. She announced recently that this mandate is going to be her last, and her health is fine. She's saying it's not a health issue, but people are kind of wondering what's up, Valerie.
Yeah. Also something I talked about with my mom yesterday, but she was just like, what did she do? And I was like, I don't really know. And she's like, I mean, that's probably like a good sign. I feel like Canada has such like a storied history of like just like a fool of a mayor. So she didn't really, I mean, she did some bad things, but she didn't do anything like in crazy bad.
Yeah, there's no
shocking.
smoking crack.
Yeah, no smoking. She was literally exactly. There was no Mel Lastman calling in the guard for a snowstorm. There wasn't anything like huge. No DUIs. Funnily, in the Gazette article announcing her departure, they make a note of pointing out that she is the first mayor to step down voluntarily and not because of disgrace or losing. I think every other mayor has either lost spectacularly or like left because of corruption, like in a long time. So it's funny that like that is our barometer. But yeah, I guess I'm like, goodbye, Valerie. It's kind of like the Montreal Institute of Genocide and Human Rights. It's just like, you didn't do much, but bye.
Yeah,
I guess she did more.
That's what we can talk about.
Okay.
There's this article in the Gazette, The Successes and Failures. Looking back on Valerie Plante's record. I think I always do enjoy these kinds of like, I don't know, like this little like accounting of everything she's done. Some of the stuff, in this is like kind of obvious. It's like classic. Like I think Valerie Plante, Projet Montreal. We think environmentalists. These are people who I would expect to support those the bridge banner droppers. Yes. At least in terms of the cause. Yeah. So here in this article it says, after 2 terms in office, Montreal Mayor Valerie Plante plans to call it quits after next year's election. The city's first female mayor is leaving on her own terms, a rarity in the city's municipal politics scene, as you're saying. All her predecessors dating back to before the turn of the century either resigned in disgrace or were defeated at the polls. Plante came to power leading a party with an ambitious agenda to make the city friendlier, greener, safer, and more accessible. So how did the self-proclaimed mayor of mobility do? Here are a few of her greatest successes and failures. When did you move to Montreal?
I actually moved to Montreal in 2017, so I think she was elected right when I got there. Yeah. And I will say, moving to Montreal in 2017, a great time to move to Montreal. There was this overwhelming sense of optimism.
You ever talk to Drew about when he moved here?
No.
It's crazy. I mean, it's just a classic story. I love talking to people who came here in the 90s or 2000s because you just hear about how cheap the rent was.
Yeah, everyone's like, when I was living here, rent was $2, and I'm like, well, it's not now.
I had an 18-bedroom apartment for 48 cents a month.
Yeah, and it's like, good for you. I wish I had that. I don't know what you want me to say to this.
Yeah. Oh, now I'm envious.
Yeah, I'm like, oh. I mean, good for you. I wish I had that. Sincerely.
So I think you're a good kind of observer then if you came here in 2017. What do you think
I think there was kind of a vibe of optimism when she was elected. I mean, Denis Coderre, I think he really represented just this macho Quebecois masculinity of a mayor, and here was this this woman is coming. I'm actually shocked she was elected in 2017. I feel like in my mind she was elected in 2013 because she has this Trudeau Obama era 2010s optimism. She's fresh off a TED Talk. This was, I think, kind of the era of feminist politics where we're I guess Hillary lost, but it was kind of end of history. Francis Fukuyama, sexism is over because we have a woman mayor, and she was going to build the Pink Line. So yeah, I would say it was largely exciting. I remember having a Projet Montreal pin on my backpack, even though I couldn't vote. And I guess her campaign was, it was center left, and she's obviously gone a little more center. And I think I have some of my own criticisms of that, but yeah. That's what I gotta say. I feel like she's made less visible enemies than Olivia Chow, who is her closest, avatar right now.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I haven't checked in on what Olivia Chow's up to. That's a little note to myself to do that later. Mayor of Toronto.
Olivia Chow, that's a pro-cop mayor.
Oh, yeah. Almost immediately, wasn't it?
She was like, I love the police. Yeah.
Day one in office, by the way, I love the cops.
And then she was like, and catch me on the next episode of Law and Order Toronto.
Valerie Plante. Yeah, I remember when she was elected. It was kind of a hopeful time because I was like, wow, here we have
I mean, it was when Obama was elected. You're like, hell yeah.
Oh yeah, 2008. Yeah. I mean, I was in high school.
I was 9.
Yeah.
But you're like, okay, a leader in power who isn't what we perceive the establishment to be.
Sure. Some semblance of hope of
some semblance of a representational.
Potentially, things are going to start shifting for the better.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember being so excited for the Pink Line, but I mean, we'll get into that later.
Oh my God, the Pink Line.
Pink Line, what a throwback. All right, so the first success in this Gazette article, bike paths.
I mean, I like bike paths.
Say what you will about Plante, but her legacy will probably be seen for decades to come on Peel Street, Saint-Denis Street, and Saint-Antoine Street, with the creation of the Réseau Express Vélo, a trademark of her Projet Montreal administration. Despite facing some opposition as they were implemented, the bicycle paths have undoubtedly improved safety by placing physical barriers between cars and bikes. Before the REV, the city's preference to bike paths was to paint lines on streets, a measure that frustrates both motorists and cyclists. With cyclists saying only physical barriers will improve safety and encourage more people to ride on 2 wheels. I think I would agree with that. I think I used to be an Uber Eats bike courier.
Oh wow.
And I think I might have been, it was just pre-COVID time. So I think as I was biking doing that job, it was this clear improvement in biking infrastructure.
Yeah. There's just a lot of hammering happening right now.
They're building a bike path right outside the studio.
I think the consensus is most people look at like random improvements that Montreal does, like the Saint-Hubert Plaza improvement, and are like, that sucks. But everyone I talk to is like, I like the rev, and I have to agree. My one criticism of Plante in general, and I think this goes in terms of like bike lanes, and I guess the next point, which is pedestrian streets, is that these are kind of things that just benefit her like kind of moneyed corporate class of liberals.
Yeah.
I mean, I go to Parkex like enough, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's not the same investment in infrastructure in Parkex or even like Saint Michel or like Montreal North as there is too in the Plateau. And like you look at these neighborhoods that are as dense, probably Parkex is the most dense neighborhood in Montreal, but it's predominantly racialized new immigrants, and they're not getting the same pedestrian streets and bike lanes that like the French people in the Plateau are getting.
Yeah, because it's going to be a much longer bike ride for them. It's going to be
they still have to like go under the Van Horn, which is like a
terrifying.
Huge pain. There's not a lot of like the areas that have safe crossings under the train are like Saint Laurent, but like Park is scary, and then you have like the Rockland Bridge, which sucks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you can kind of see where priorities are, and I do worry that in our absence things can kind of open up for a further right mayoral candidate, but who knows? Maybe I'm inventing a problem.
No, I mean, I guess that we'll have to see. I mean, it's so I don't know that there's any real front runners for the next municipal election in 2025 in November, but it's going to be interesting to see how people work. I can't imagine people really undoing these kinds of things.
No, it's hard to undo a bike path like that. And I think a whole, like as you mentioned, even like the most staunchly anti-bike path car like head, you can look at Saint Denis and be like, okay, this actually makes things like better. Like, they have their own little thing. I have my own thing.
Yeah. I think people, I mean, there's a whole thing about like cyclists and pedestrians are that they're much more likely to stop for like businesses, right? Like I think Saint Denis before this was kind of like, I mean, I'm not going to say dead, but like it was I think much less busy as it is now.
Yeah, it's honestly bumping.
It's like, it's bumping.
There's so many swag stores there.
There is a lot.
So many for like vintage clothes resellers.
Yeah. You bike? Get off your bike and buy some Supreme.
Literally, like, get this car. You want it so bad. And you know what? Those cyclists do.
They do love that. They do love that.
Where they don't have money to pay for a car mortgage, they are buying vintage reseller clothes.
I think I like the point you bring up because of course like Plante, who is like this environmentalist, is kind of like person who cares about the environment. I think it's undeniable that there is this sort of like type of voter that she's kind of like catering towards.
She's catering to a voter who like cares about the environment but like doesn't want to like see the end of capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Usually, I mean, often enough, it's like kind of like sort of like wealthy white environmentalists, right? The people who are maybe driving Teslas or have their expensive electric bikes or what have you. Yeah. And of course, like this next point. So you're talking about in the next point in the Gazette article, it lists pedestrian streets as a success. I think it's very similar to the last success. This is about like kind of like making it so you can experience Montreal, you can get around at like a human pace and scale, and something that's like that does not have to be in a car or of course in public transit, and something it's like a much friendlier way to experience the city. It's nice. Yeah, it's nice. I love when they close down the streets. Yeah. It's such a nice time.
It's nice, and I will say I think they cut back the STM bus service like last year, and then people were mad, and then they like reinstated it to be like normal, and people were happy, but it wasn't like a significant improvement. So yeah, I think you can kind of see like she's a mayor who cares about the environment, and there has been I think other successes she did, but a lot of the tangible things that would result in like long-term climate action, I don't think she really did it. These are kind of like nice, like it's obviously like nice to have a bike lane, and I think having a bike lane is crucial.
It's like urban like beautification.
It's urban beautification, but it's less so like, I mean, like the Blue Line extension, I will give her props to that. But yeah, you still have Montreal North that has like terrible air quality and it's basically like impossible to get to, not connected at all to the downtown. And so you're just like disenfranchising everyone who lives there. Yeah.
I mean, again, that goes to the point of like who she kind of serves, right?
But I will say, I feel like I went to Gouin Street, like in Rivière des Prairies, and they had pedestrian streets there. It is a high income neighborhood, but like it's not, these pedestrian streets aren't just like confined to the downtown and Plateau. Sure. But they definitely think are more confined towards high income areas.
What are you doing up there?
I just went to the park. It was really nice.
It is a nice park. They do have a nice park up there.
Yeah, TMR. They're never going to pedestrianize the street.
I can't.
They love their cars.
They love the car. Yeah. They love the cars. They love the new giant mall. Another success from the Gazette. Environment. Plante's record on the environment is mixed, mostly because of the sheer number of commitments she and Projet Montréal have made over the years. Perhaps the biggest and most well-remembered environmental policy was an early Plante decision to bar Mount Royal's Caminir Oud to cars in the first months of her mandate, a decision that was met with much opposition. Despite holding public consultations where the overwhelming majority believed there should be some car access, Plante remained firm and once again promised to bar the iconic mountain parkway to cars.
I think there should be like bus access. I take the 11.
I drive that all the time. I think it's
pretty nice.
It's a nice drive.
It's one of the best bus rides you can take. It's beautiful.
It's a tough bike.
Yeah, I would not.
I did that once. It's a very tough bike. Massive props to the cyclists who do it. They always put that as part of the cycling Grand Prix here in Montreal. Other environmental achievements include the creation of the. Let's wide it out. The team will see the city purchase 11 hectares. Oh yeah, this is the new giant park in the southwest.
I think that really just shows to this liberal understanding of environmentalism being like buying a park and like stopping to use green space, which is like in itself a very colonial idea. And instead of like recognizing the fact that like nature exists all around us and can still exist, and we can still be conscientious and have green space without it having to be like privatized or like designated as such. And I think even like she's just like a lot of her environmental wins have been good, but they're just so individual and like neolib. And when she banned plastic straws and single-use plastics, like we still have a Suncor refinery. Like banning plastic straws isn't going to reduce like Montreal's emissions. We literally have an oil refinery on our island that is making our air quality some of the worst in the province.
Oh, wow. Well, I don't think that's gonna be. Oh,
yeah.
Drop the mic. No, I don't know. I think. I mean, to me, this all goes like the stuff about like the beautification of parks, pedestrian streets.
Okay, but like I also like I like them.
Like
I benefit from all of these things.
These are things I like, but these are things that are like. There's a thing that it serves where it's like a city gets its like I always talk about this on the show, but a city gets most of its tax revenue from property values, right? And like how that's doing the work of adding pedestrian streets, of adding nice bike paths, of making parks more accessible, increases property values.
Yes.
Right? So it increases property values in a certain way. So she gets to be like, hey, look, I did like the green version of like green capitalism, where it's like there's more like nice stuff that's going to be good for the environment or whatever. And now your property values go up. So that's sort of like the deal that's happening, right?
Liberals love to like take something that's like a social justice issue and like add an economic spin to it. They're like, did you know migrants make you a lot of money? And it's I kind of don't give a shit if they would make money for the economy or not.
Can we not treat them better?
Yeah, it's like everything has to have an economic angle and increase the value of capital. But anyways, I'm sure she was better than Denis Coderre. I did not live here when he was mayor, but I saw that he got skinny.
Oh yeah.
He like lost a lot of weight.
Cinched.
His waist was snatched, which I'm kind of worried. I feel like that's it.
People talk about him running for
he said, I think a couple of years ago, he's like, I'll be back. And I'm like, I feel like an arc of a guy who just lost a ton of weight and kind of like an Ozempic fitness arc could be really evil.
Yeah. Uh-oh. And he's driving some big car. Yeah.
Skinny people famously really evil.
There it is. we need the list of them. Before you mention the blue line, that's something the Gazette article lists as sort of a mixed thing. It's sort of a where am I? It's sort of a failure and a success that the article lists. Because of course I think any kind of public transit extension good. Of course I think there's still some kind of like works on having some kind of like pink line alternative for Lachine, some kind of tramway to come in, but it's like the whole appeal of the pink. I mean, to me, this is like a huge. To me, I would say much more failure, because to me, the whole idea of the pink line was that it's gonna serve neighborhoods that are predominantly just like poor, working class. Immigrant, a lot of them.
Imagine the way it would increase their property value.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other side of it.
Imagine how much those apartments in Montreal Nord would go be if they were beside like Joan of Arc station.
Yeah. The new pink station.
I actually can't remember any of the other women on the pink line except for Joan of Arc, which is a crazy one to put on the pink line. Yeah. They were just like, name a woman.
Marilyn Monroe. Joan of Arc.
Literally Joan of Arc. It's like, what
Renee Zellweger.
What does she have to do with like Montreal? I guess they're just like appealing to the francophones. I don't know.
Something like that.
But I agree. Like her. I feel like the REM is the other thing that happened under her watch, but I guess it's more of a provincial thing.
It's much more
and there's a lot of criticism towards the REM. I mean, like, you maybe would know better than me, but having been raised in Longueuil, but I feel like a lot of criticism are that it just doesn't actually go to areas that should be served and have really massively disrupted like transit for people in that area, which I'm like, that sucks. Yeah. It's also private. It's like a public-private partnership, and it's not just...
It is mostly kind of... I mean, the whole criticism about it from like there's great reports on it by Transparence, like Transparence, but Train, where they talk about how like a lot of the key players... It's essentially just kind of like... It was funded by like the Quebec Pension Fund, and what it kind of just did was like it helped these like real estate people increase the value of their condos and their buildings because they had land near these areas. Because they built these condos in places that are just like inaccessible to like public transit.
Oh yeah.
And then they're like, okay, how do we fix this? What if we use public money to get like kind of like a light rail that goes right to our building?
Yeah, they're kind of like following the Toronto Line 1 inspiration of just having really high density condos alongside major transit points, and then like not improving the density for other parts of the city. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing the article lists as I will say there is a real improvement that happened. There's a lot of the stations in Montreal I think improved. A lot of them were like updated, expanded.
I would
like,
agree.
Mount Royal is one of them.
Really nice.
Vendôme is another one. Really nice. And I think something that's really important to mention, of course, is the accessibility for these stations.
That's actually really true.
Before Montreal, like these, like I think there was like 2 stations in Montreal before all these renovations that were like wheelchair accessible. Now it's much more than that. You have a ton of stations along the Orange Line, along the Green Line that now have like elevators.
So I know it was happening for a bit, but I don't know if it's a permanent change. But having the STM be free to seniors, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think public
it's free for anyone above 65.
It is public. I think it should be free as it is like its description. But yeah, I think that's good. I think I think having it more accessible and having more frequency and having more people being able to ride it for free are like really crucial steps in the right direction. I'll give her that.
She made it free for seniors above 65.
Nice.
And children under 12 who are accompanied.
Nice. And I think the next step is having more bathrooms in them.
Ooh,
I think in North America we're really afraid of having a public bathroom.
This is true. Yeah.
And so many people just like pee on the street, and it's like if we just had public bathrooms.
Fixed.
They'd be fixed.
Yeah. People don't like the idea of public bathrooms, but Japan does them nice.
Taiwan does them great. If you go in Japan and Taiwan and many parts of like Asia and East Asia, it's considered a massive. It was considered like part of like it's like a health issue. Like if you have people like peeing and then pooing in the street because it's so humid there that people were gonna get giardia.
Yeah.
And honestly, people get giardia in Montreal, so maybe if we just had some public bathrooms you don't have to pay for.
There you go.
And they're all super clean. I was using them and they're great.
There you go. A glowing endorsement of
crazy
public
that some
bathrooms.
of the nicest public bathrooms are the en routes in Ontario.
Those are reliable. Reliable. Yeah.
So like if you are afraid of using a metro bathroom or that concept, why are you okay with using an en route? Is it because you think cars are safer and cleaner? Do you hate poor people?
Think about that. Chew on it. Self-crit. I remember when I was an Uber Eats courier, the public bathroom thing was a big issue because it was like, because just especially as the pandemic started, I was still like doing the courier stuff, and I'd go to a restaurant, but can I use your washroom? And they'd be like, oh, sorry, no. And I'm like, all right, cool. I just have to like, I'll just piss my pants, I guess.
Yeah,
what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, your order's late. I had to pee my pants.
So many of these incidents could be like. I think people also just like hate homeless people and hate like I think it's like, and they hate like drug users, and a big argument. It's like, well, people are gonna like have sex and do drugs in there, and it's like people are having sex and doing drugs in public regardless if there's a bathroom or not. Like that's truly not an issue.
At least let me piss.
Yeah, like at least like I feel like it might be better if we have these, because then it'll I don't know.
Yeah, take it away from like something more public space.
Take it away from something like as taboo and just be like, okay, this is just like what people do.
Yeah. No, totally fair. But no, that's a great idea, having more accessible bathrooms accessible in the metro system.
Yeah, famously there used to be a lot of public bathrooms in Montreal, like the Camiliens, like the public bathrooms that you see in the squares named after Camille and Oud. And also in Toronto, they had a bunch of public bathrooms on Spadina, and they filled them in with concrete because they were like, let's just let the private sphere handle this. And you really should never let the private sphere handle most things.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, I learned that on YouTube, so maybe someone fact check that.
Shouts out. Well, I mean, sometimes we're on YouTube and our audience learns stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess So public transit, I'd say mostly. I mean, I think I would agree. Mix of fail. There's things that are definitely a fail.
Yeah, I was gonna say we should acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is the SPVM, our biggest failure.
Yes. Yeah. That's something this article does not really mention, because it goes on to talk about housing, homelessness. Of course, huge failure. Homelessness doubled. It's not really quite Plante's fault, I would say. It doubled. The rise in homelessness happened everywhere. The article talks about city finances as well. But I think something that was missing from this is what you're bringing up, the SPVM. Under Plante's, was it the Black Lives Matter stuff happened under Plante? All whole populations became much more critical, conscientious of how actual like resources are being given to the police, right? Because before it was a whole the argument about like police brutality and these kinds of things was much more about like reforming them, about kind of like having oversight tools like body cams was one of the big ones, or changing their methods. The older ones were like police need to stop doing headlocks, they need to stop using their clubs, they need to stop using these specific tools. Where now the in the last 10 years, now the conversation is much more about what resources do we give them, and why do they need this amount of resources, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to looking at any issue like climate change or police brutality. It's like, do you want a tech fix to get yourself out of this crisis, or do you want to actually like overhaul the system? And a tech fix is often, I think, easier for like investors to understand and infuse. But yeah, I think Plante, I just feel like we've seen in the wake of defund a lot of like budgets grow. I think the Montreal police, they had their highest budget today, and that is something that the mayor's office does have control over.
Yeah. Well, the police set their own budgets. I mean, we had Ted Rutland on, the professor at Concordia, fantastic guest, talking about Montreal's police. He has like such good like accounting of all the kind of things they've done and like the different ways the city sort of just either empowers them or just kind of lets them do their own thing. Because the whole thing is the police set their own budgets, and there's always these cost overruns. They always go over budget, and there's never really any kind of like chastising. There's never really any kind of like I guess reprimand that the police get for these kinds of things. They're just kind of like, hey, sorry about that, we're gonna need more money, and the city's like, okay. Like there's hardly any friction. The city has opportunities to give friction to these to like police budgets and stuff like that, and they have absolutely not done that.
Yeah, I think it's really telling that like the police are just allowed to have unlimited budget because they're seen as a necessity, whereas something like education, which is a necessity, people should know how to read, is like defunded. And yeah, I think it kind of shows that like the way that resources could be allocated towards like education and housing and transit, like I think that would require kind of like this radical reimagining that people aren't like truly like willing to grasp, because it shatters this like illusion of the imagined enemy that requires the police force to exist, and kind of like challenges
they keep us safe.
Yeah, challenges the role of the SPVM. It's like, who are they? What are they keeping us safe for? And the answer is probably a lot of immigrants and like a lot of like homeless people, and like the Sûreté du Québec and SPVM's long history of anti-Indigenous racism and their role in like Canada's colonial project.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what they're designed for, right?
Yeah, they're designed to keep order in like a white settler state, and they're doing that. And you can't really reform your way out of that.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of stuff with like Projet Montréal not really giving any kind of like opposition or friction to the SPVM, I think is one of like the huge failures of that party, of the administration. And I think it feeds into this idea of like what we were talking about before. Who do they serve? They serve sort of like a wealthier white environmentalist kind of like voting bloc who want like beautification, who want their property values up. But then, of course, they want the police to stay there, of course, you know, because who's gonna keep the order?
I think they just like to be atomized and like want all the things that keep you atomized, which is like, I don't know, police and no public spaces and a car.
Yeah. There's a good quote from Ted Rutland I have here about the way the city approaches the police. Ted Rutland, a professor at Concordia University in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment, was one of those questioning Montreal's chief of police at City Hall. They basically spend whatever they want, and we just write them a check at the end of the year, said Rutland. Whereas when other city services like public transit go over budget, they have to cut all kinds of costs to please the city. And it shows you that kind of like difference, right, in the way that like budget is approached with like things like police and things like public transit, where like public transit cuts, whatever, we gotta increase the fares, we gotta make it less accessible. Police went over budget. Well, that's just
we need to have that, and ignore the fact that like transit and housing is a necessity too. But yeah, I'm using it. I'm just taking the example of the TPS, the Toronto Police Services, just because I like learned this recently. But yeah, on the topic of like how police budgets are allocated, the TPS, they like literally had a bar in like the head like a precinct that was just closed, and it was like funded by taxpayer dollars.
Like bar, like alcohol.
And because I think Toronto's hosting either the Pan Am Games or the FIFA very soon, they got a lot of money to increase their security measures, and I think immediately they've already spent like $1 million of those on AirPods for police officers.
Oh my God.
So it's very interesting to see the same people who are like, we need to cut things, like you can't just have a government job and expect things from taxpayer money, and then they're like, cops, AirPods. But like, God forbid a librarian asks for like, I don't know, anything.
This might be hearsay, but I remember someone was talking. I was at this barbershop once, and they were talking about like they're complaining about the police. They're saying their cousins like in this one precinct out in like the like East End of Montreal, and they're saying like in the precinct it's just like an arcade, just like a little like arcade like set up, and like they just do nothing.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine did horrors.
Oh my God.
To culture. More damage than Law and Order, I have to say, because they're just like, what if a police officer was fun? And there's a Quebec version of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So you know it's dangerous.
Yeah. Uh-oh. I mean, yeah. It would take, I think, incredible courage and moral kind of like fortitude for Plante to really stand up to these people. And she didn't do that, right?
No.
She absolutely did not. It was not a concern of hers. Like, I mean, it's interesting because like they talk about like where we're gonna get the money for things like, I don't know, like metro improvements or like public transit, and like the answer is like the police right there. It's like they take up so much resources.
They have the horses. I don't think, and I've seen them used all the time, but can like someone point me to one time an SPVM horse was used to arrest somebody?
Oh yeah.
Like
probably
imagine being
during the student strikes.
I mean, imagine being arrested and then you got put on a horse.
That's so medieval.
Yeah, like what now? I guess we're at 90 minutes.
Yeah, we are. I mean, this is a great place to end on.
Yeah.
I think. One thing. I mean, another kind of like point against Plante was the Montreal police commissioner, Patrice Vilsius, resigning, and even like identifying the issue of like he's like, yeah, systemic racism in the SPVM is like a cancer, and he could not work after 30 years. He could not work in there anymore, you know. And like what an indictment of the system. I mean, of course, to be expected. It's like, who's surprised? I think maybe like people like François Legault and the people who don't believe there to be systemic racism in Canada, in Quebec, in any of these institutions, maybe they were surprised. But like, come on, this is like par for the course at this point.
Yeah, I mean, not expected, but obviously still really shitty because people are being affected by this every day. Yeah. I can't believe. Yeah, was this guy white? Like, what was?
No, he was a racialized man.
Okay, well, damn, if he was in it for 30 years and he couldn't cut it.
Yeah.
Sucks. He was no Eric Adams.
No, not at all. No, he's gone. Anyways, that concludes. I mean, we wanted to talk about. There's so much more to talk about. We want to talk about high-speed rail. We wanted to talk about the Royal Mountain Mall. But history just keeps happening. There's always things to talk about. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kalden. This
of course.
Honestly great to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
I feel invigorated. I hope people listening enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm sure they did. Thank you for coming on. Where could people follow you and where could people follow you in the stuff you do?
Nowhere. I like to keep my socials quite private for now.
Okay,
but
fair
one day
enough.
maybe I'll change that.
Do you wanna
I mean, you can just go on my website, which is just my name. Just look me up.
Katia Lo-Innes
at tumblr.com. You can find my author page. I don't really use social media for like my reporting right now.
Do you want people reading the
read the Breach. Read the Breach. Sign up for the newsletter.
How about the Hobart?
Read my new short story in Hobart Pulp.
Yeah. I really like it. It's very nice little short story.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well,
but
thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Kalden.
Thank you for listening. That's it for today's episode. Keep your head high despite all the ways that the news keeps you down, and take care of yourselves.
Bye.
Take care.